I'm in a Hands of Time mood. What I mean by that is I rewatched the entire thing in one day because I'm very sane, thank you. I took some stuff away from it, which I plan on discussing in a slightly longer video, which has actually been in the works for quite a while, so hopefully that'll be coming up sometime in the near future. But for today, I want to specifically talk about my favorite part of that whole season, those being the Time Twins, Crux and Acronix. These are two of my favorite villains we've ever received, only rivaled by Kalmar and Moro. What's unique about them right away is that they operate as a pair, which opens up the door to some wonderful dialogue.
You lost the Time Blade. We had the Time Blade, and now we do not have the Time Blade. You used the Time Blade? Time Blade, Time Blade, Time Blade, Time Blade, Time Blade would not have lost the Time Blade!
Acronix and Crux were the original elemental masters of time. They were some of Wu's most valuable allies until one day they got greedy and decided their powers were the most OP, which apparently gave them the permission to take over the universe. Lo and behold, they failed, they were stripped of their powers, and Acronix was trapped in a 40-year limbo. So now Crux, separated from his twin brother and his powers, decided to spend the next 40 years assembling a snake army and enslaving innocent metal workers to prepare for Acronix's return in Hands of Time. Now in Hands of Time, we've also got two main protagonists, Kai and Nia. And right away you can see that these two pairs kind of mirror each other. The most obvious thing is that they're both sets of siblings, which the show makes a very subtle point of referencing.
Good to see you, sis.
Back at you, bro. Brother!
I'm here for you, sister.
A lesson in sibling rivalry.
I don't know, guys, it feels like they might be siblings. Maybe that's just me. But this is gonna be my main focus for the video, is the Time Twins, but also their comparisons to Kai and Nia. Because I've been thinking about it, and some of their similarities really fascinate me. So that's kind of what I'm gonna dive into. So, without further ado, Instagram.
Sharing this with all my Instabook followers.
I'm sorry, Instabook. And to that effect, technology as a whole. When Acronix gets spit back into the world after 40 years, he is absolutely enthralled with technology, which makes sense because he's never seen it before. We see him get head over heels excited at TV commercials and calculators, which is very wholesome, by the way. But Crux, by contrast, is less enthusiastic.
Commercials. Cynical films playing off consumers' insecurities to convince them to purchase that which they do not need.
So cool.
And right off the bat, I find this extremely interesting. On the surface, it's like you've got the younger Gen Z type social media enthusiast and the grumpy old man. But this doesn't actually really make sense. Acronix has been stuck in limbo for 40 years, so from his perspective, he basically got thrown into the future. So despite him being physically younger, mentally it feels like he would be stuck in the past a lot more than Crux. But he isn't, he's a big fan of the future. But then Crux, who's been growing with the world, is super against modern tech. Now let's take a quick look at our protagonists. Nia is super techie, like she built the Samurai X suit because she had some spare time. But then Kai, on the other hand, is not against technology per se, but he has this one hilariously random line in Rebooted.
People should concern themselves with the lessons of the past, not waste their time on disposable fads of tomorrow when—
And then you've got the infamous Airhead scene where he's arguing with Cole about how much he hates video games, and then flash forward to 9 seasons later when he dies with Cole in a video game. But then in Seabound, we see him playing video games with Cole. Character development.
Cole's staying too.
Anyway, what I'm getting at is you've got Crux and Kai, who dislike technology, and Acronix and Nia, who are absolutely obsessed with it. The question I raise is, why? Well, let's look at it this way. Crux has spent the past 40 years waiting for the day of Acronix's return. By the size of his plans and this whole compound he's got set up, I doubt he's been focusing on much else. He's been holding on to this grudge against the Elemental Masters for decades, and everything he's done since then has been in preparation for the day he can finally get his revenge. He was a Spheraing before it was cool. This must have trapped him in quite a stagnant mindset. If all you dedicate yourself to for 40 years is an event that happened in your past, you're not really gonna grow into the future, are you? He's just been waiting and waiting and waiting, and that doesn't leave much room for experiencing. And thus, the world has evolved around him. Instinctively, he would reject change because his whole purpose now is to go back to that day in the past and return to his former glory. But then you've got Acronix. What you've got to remember about him is that he feels like no time has passed. He's still riding the same ego trip that got him sent to limbo in the first place. He didn't go through those years of waiting, he just woke up one day and found that his brother had a whole army and headquarters ready to go. So while Crux has no doubt been worn down over the years, Acronix is still fueled by all their original ambitions. So you can see why he'd be super excited about change. Imagine being Acronix and having all these new technology and weapons at your disposal. Your future has to feel pretty promising. That's really what it is they have different points of focus. Crux spent all that time waiting for the return of Acronix, who to him represents the past, but Acronix never experienced that time delay, so he's still moving on into the future. Let's look at how this compares to Kai and Nia. Now obviously they haven't been hurdled through the boundaries of space and time, but they do have some interesting similarities. Kai and Nia were left abandoned after Crux kidnapped their parents and forced them to work for him, so their stories have always been interconnected. Given Kai's age and his dynamic with Nia now, we can assume that he's the one who did most of the caretaking as they were growing up alone. He's very protective over Nia and is constantly looking after her. We don't know exactly how long they lived like this, but it must have been at least 10 or so years. Then in Season 1, when Nia starts stepping into herself more, Kai is really hesitant. He's nervous to send her into the world, you could say, because he's so used to having her under his protection. But he gives in because he can see that Nia's super eager to gain that freedom, and Kai just wants what's best for Nia. So what do you have here? You have an older sibling who's nervous to adapt to change, and a younger sibling who's super excited to explore her future. Sounding familiar? 'Cause it should be. Crux and Kai are really very similar in principle. They've both dedicated the better part of their lives to their siblings' best interests, and also at their own expense. Kai likely had to sacrifice his childhood. He had to mentally grow up and take care of Nia and do all that work for the both of them. And Crux, I guess you could say he sacrificed his morality. He kidnapped and enslaved Rey and Maya, which really set his villainy in stone. It made him somebody beyond redemption. What's very important to keep in mind is that Crux carried out all these evil acts without Acronix's awareness. As Crux is going through all this turmoil, Acronix is just in limbo, blissfully oblivious. And symbolically, this rings true for Kai and Nia as well. For a while, Kai's out there being a ninja, putting himself in danger, while Nia's safe on the bounty. It's why he's worried about her becoming Samurai X, is because he's not used to her bearing that kind of responsibility. You could say that Crux and Kai's motivations center around preservation and protection. But then Acronix and Nia are in this position where they've been living under their older siblings' wings. Acronix had zero say in any of Crux's evil schemes. He just woke up one day and was like, oh, guess this is my life now. And Nia never had the choice to join the team or not. She had to because she needed to stay with Kai. So you can see why they're both so enticed by the idea of stepping into this new, changing world. It's exciting for them. Nia and Acronix are essentially the impetus that have controlled Crux and Kai's actions their whole lives. But despite how heavily they revolve around each other, their different perspectives lead to different mindsets, which has led to these brief moments of disagreement and conflict. Which makes you wonder, for Crux and Kai, were their sacrifices worth it? I'm gonna say yes, because all they really wanted was to see the welfare of their siblings, and they both achieved that. Look at the absolute delight on Acronix's face as he's exploring all this new tech. Yeah, Crux is kind of annoyed, but he's annoyed more so at the tech versus Acronix himself, and you can tell that he's really glad to see his brother returned. Then look at Nia's enjoyment being Samurai X, and later on her love of technology and mechanics. I love this conversation she has with Kai on the bikes, because it's just so sweet and wholesome. Like, she's talking about something that she's super passionate about, and you can just see how fond Kai is. Like, I just love it. But then, of course, the other thing going on in this scene is Kai is holding back a lot of information from her. He's learning all this worrying information about their parents, and he isn't telling her because he doesn't want to upset her. And that just goes to show how much weight Kai must have shouldered for Nia over the years. He protects her from negativity because he doesn't want to see her upset. Just as Crux went through 40 years of work, so Acronix could come back into the world with all his courage and ambition still fresh. Am I reading into this too much? I might be, but I don't care. So again, the sacrifices that Crux and Kai made were absolutely worth it, because yeah, it cost them, but just look at the enthusiasm and optimism that their younger siblings still have. And it's that confidence they've been raised with that gives them strength. One in a positive way, one in a slightly more sadistic way, but it's the same idea. Wu says something in the first episode that kind of sheds light on this.
You assume your youth is a greater weapon than my experience.
It's interesting, because his point is that Acronix's physical strength is no match for Wu's experience. But he kind of gets proven wrong. Acronix hits him with the time punch, which causes him to rapidly age, and that puts him at a disadvantage, and he gets overpowered. And then later, you've got scenes where Wu's worried about how little time he has before the rapid aging takes full effect.
So little time, so many lessons.
You've got all these parallels that are being drawn between age and the value of time, and it's really interesting. Like, even look at their powers. Acronix, who's younger now, can speed up time, while Crux, who's older, can go back in time. And it's like with Nia, because Kai's presumably shielded her from a lot of the world, so she still has this excitement for new experiences or moving on into the future. And it comes from this place of, I guess you could say, innocence that Kai's protected for her. But then, like Crux, this causes Kai to reject change because he places so much value on security and safety. So when you've got Acronix implying that his youth is an advantage, he's not technically wrong. He and Nia will always have this kind of safety net because their older siblings are always there to catch them. And then you've got Wu's increasing age being shown as a disadvantage, and him stressing over lack of time. Time throughout this whole thing could really be equated to life, the time these characters have left to live. This is why I'm so intrigued by the Time Twins, because they have the power to manipulate time, but because of their life experiences, they have such different mindsets and they go about it in different ways. Achronix is all about speed, what's coming next, experiencing as many things as possible, whereas Crux would rather conserve time and use it as more of a safety blanket.
Further back in the past.
No, far into the future.
But at the end of the day, all they're trying to do is, like they say, control time, or maximize the time they have left in their lives. Wu phrases it pretty well.
Stripped of their powers, Achronix and Crux were just two ordinary men.
Strip away the sci-fi supernatural aspect of it, and Achronix and Crux are really just two guys who want to make the absolute most of their life, but the extent to which they fear mortality has them paranoid to the point of betrayal, slavery, transcending the boundaries of space and time. It's not like they're trying to rule over Ninjago or become rich or level cities for the sake of it. They just want to control the timeline. Which comes with the unfortunate stipulation of everyone else who lives in said timeline. But do you see what I'm saying? As masters of time, they, more than anyone, understand the value and fragility of time, and they'll do anything to have a hand in that power. Hand in the power of time, hands of time, get it? I'm hilarious. So as well as being a reflection of Kai and Nia, they also seem to be kind of a reflection of mortality and the lengths people will go to cheat that. Again, I am probably reading way too deep into this, but, do you kind of get what I'm saying? As someone who's likely spent more time than the average human hyper-analyzing a bunch of cartoon Legos, I can say with confidence that these two really, really intrigue me. Everything about them is, overflowing with symbolism, and maybe I'm kidding myself, maybe I'm overcomplicating things, but either way, I love these two. So, yeah, there you go. This was a fun video to make. I love fishing for parallels and hidden meanings, even when there probably isn't anything we're supposed to find, but, it's still entertaining either way, and Hands of Time is just absolutely full of them, so, On a completely unrelated note...
Children.
Nia. Kai!
Have a good day, see ya!